The night sky over Earth was quiet and calm, the stars shining with their gentle light. People in small towns and great cities looking up without fear, some lovers walking along rivers, some children sleeping in their rooms, and some guards watching empty roads, all of them believing the world was safe, all of them believing nothing could ever reach down from the heavens. But that peace was only an illusion, a thin layer ready to break. Without warning, the stars began to vanish, one by one swallowed by massive black shapes that slid across the heavens. Ships so large that they blocked the moonlight, ships with hulls that looked like floating mountains of iron, their edges glowing with faint alien light, their engines humming in a way no human ear had ever heard before, a sound like a deep storm rolling across the sky. People looked up in confusion, some whispering that they were clouds, some saying maybe they were meteors. But soon the truth could not be hidden, because the ships moved with precision, sliding into lines that were too perfect, too sharp, and too deliberate to be natural, formation after formation locking into place until the night sky became a battlefield waiting to open, until the heavens became a ceiling of war. Inside the largest ship, an alien commander stood tall, his armor shining with cold blue light, his eyes like burning fire, and his voice steady as he spoke to his warriors, telling them that the time had come at last, telling them that their people had trained for 100 years for this night, that they had prepared every strike, every weapon, every strategy, and that Earth would fall in hours, the humans would kneel, that nothing could stop the power of a century of practice. The alien soldiers pounded their chests with fists made of steel and flesh, their voices rising in one terrible roar that shook the walls of their ship, chanting words of conquest, chanting promises of victory, and in their pride they felt nothing but certainty, nothing but the belief that they were unstoppable. The humans were weak prey waiting for the slaughter. Far below, the world of Earth shook with panic. Alarms screamed in the cities as radar stations lit up with impossible readings, lines of red blips covering screens, and human soldiers rushed to their posts, commanders shouting orders, jets roaring into the night, missile silos unlocking with metallic groans. But even as humans prepared, they felt a weight pressing down on them, a weight that came from the sheer size of the enemy above. Governments held emergency councils, leaders staring at giant monitors that showed the black alien fleet, their voices filled with fear and disbelief, some shouting that diplomacy must be tried, others saying that resistance was hopeless, but all of them knowing deep inside that the world was facing something it had never faced before, something too vast to truly comprehend. The narrator's voice carried through the chaos, calm and heavy like a storm about to break, telling the truth in words that cut deeper than any sword, saying for 100 years they trained for this day, for 100 years they sharpened their weapons and hardened their warriors, and they believed Earth would fall in hours. They believed humanity would crumble like sand before the tide. Crowds filled the streets in terror, families trying to escape the cities, cars jamming highways, mothers clutching children, fathers staring at the sky with trembling hands, and across the oceans the same fear spread, from mountains to deserts to forests, all people lifting their eyes and seeing the same horror, the same dark shapes hovering like gods of war, silent but full of death. In the alien flagship, the commander raised one clawed hand, his voice echoing across the fleet, calm yet sharp like a blade, a voice that carried no doubt, a voice that promised fire. He spoke the order that had been prepared for a century, the order every soldier had been waiting for, the order that would turn night into a nightmare. Commence the invasion, he commanded, and the alien fleet obeyed. The silence of the heavens shattered as the first energy blasts tore through the atmosphere, streaks of burning light cutting across the dark sky, explosions blooming in the air like falling suns, the earth trembling under the force of weapons never before seen by human eyes, weapons born from a century of planning and hate. People screamed as the ground shook, windows shattered, buildings cracked. The world seemed to groan as if it too felt the weight of the attack. And in that first moment of fire and destruction, humanity realized the truth. The invasion had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The air filled with the roar of engines, the scream of falling bombs, the thunder of alien artillery. Cities became seas of flame. Streets turned into rivers of smoke, and the sky itself glowed red as though the world had been thrown into a furnace. People ran. Soldiers fired. Leaders prayed. But everywhere the same shadow fell. The shadow of a fleet that had been waiting for this night for 100 years. And as the fire rained down, the alien commander stood unmoving on his bridge, his eyes cold, his heart proud, believing that victory was already his, believing that humanity was finished before the real war had even begun, unaware that the story he thought he had written was only just starting, unaware that Earth was not the prey he imagined, unaware that the century of alien training would soon meet something far stronger. The night sky burned, and the world held its breath as the invasion began. The night sky was still on fire from the first alien attack, flames rising from broken cities, sirens wailing across continents, people crying and running as towers collapsed and streets turned into rubble. But even in that storm of fear, the human spirit did not break. In bunkers and command centers, voices rose, sharp and steady, refusing to let Earth be crushed without a fight. Jets roared into the sky, their wings cutting through smoke and ash, pilots gripping their controls tight, their eyes fixed on the massive alien ships above. The pilots had been trained for war against humans, not against gods from the stars. Yet they flew anyway, their voices calm on the radio, calling targets, promising each other that they would fight until the last breath, their courage burning brighter than the fires below. In one command bunker buried under the ground, generals watched the chaos on giant screens, each feed showing another city under siege, each report shouting of destruction. But the generals did not collapse. Instead, they shouted orders, unlocking secret defense systems hidden for decades, missile silos opening, submarines surfacing, satellites awakening. Humanity had always feared such a day, and though unprepared in numbers, they had been preparing in spirit, always knowing deep inside that survival depended on fire and unity. Across the oceans, warships rose, their decks bristling with missiles, their radars locked onto alien shadows, captains calling for launch, sailors praying but standing firm, and one by one the missiles tore into the sky, trails of fire chasing the invaders, streaks of human defiance rushing upward against the black hulls that blotted the stars. And though many missiles exploded harmlessly against alien shields, some struck with burning force, shaking enemy ships, proving that humans would not kneel so easily. Inside the flagship of the alien fleet, the commander felt the first tremors as human weapons struck. His eyes narrowed, his pride wounded. He had promised his people that Earth would fall without resistance. Yet already he saw that humanity was more stubborn than expected. Already he realized that training for 100 years had not prepared them for enemies who fought like cornered beasts, fierce and unyielding. And in that moment a seed of doubt touched his heart, though he buried it with anger. In the burning city below, a group of soldiers dragged civilians from collapsed buildings, their uniforms blackened by smoke, their faces streaked with sweat and ash. Yet their eyes hard as stone, they moved not for glory but for duty, carrying children in their arms, guiding the elderly through fire, and every rescued cry gave them strength. Every moment of survival became another strike against despair. The soldiers became the shield of humanity, and though alien blasts fell around them, they did not stop, they did not surrender. The narrator's voice whispered through the smoke, carrying the weight of history, saying that the aliens believed victory was already in their claws. The humans would break like twigs under the storm. Yet the truth was different, for humanity had always thrived in fire, had always risen from ruin, had always fought hardest when cornered, and in that dark hour the human heart beat louder than the alien guns, louder than the flames that devoured the night. High above the earth, a squadron of jets broke through the clouds, finding themselves face to face with one alien cruiser, its surface glowing with strange light, its cannons turning to fire. But the human pilots did not scatter. They dove straight at it, weaving between bursts of energy, their missiles slamming into the ship's armor, one explosion after another blooming against its hull. And though the cruiser did not fall, it staggered, its shields flickering, and the humans shouted in triumph, their voices rising like thunder across the radios. The alien commander slammed his claws against the railing of his bridge, his voice roaring across the fleet, ordering his soldiers to strike harder, to crush the humans beneath overwhelming fire. But even as he spoke, more reports came in, reports of damaged ships, reports of resistance stronger than predictions. And though he raged with fury, deep inside he felt the first taste of fear, a whisper that the prey he hunted might not only resist, but also wound the hunter. On the ground, scientists in hidden labs worked in haste, rushing to activate secret technologies once thought impossible. Reverse-engineered fragments from old crashes, prototypes hidden in shadows, now brought into the light. They connected circuits, aligned crystals, and whispered that maybe, just maybe, they could use the enemy's own energy against them. And though time was short, they worked with desperate speed, because they knew the battle was not only of guns but of minds, and inhuman. Minds burned a fire no alien training could predict. Families huddled in shelters, their hearts racing with each tremor, children crying, parents whispering promises of safety. And though fear filled their veins, they also felt something else, a rising determination, a belief that if soldiers fought in the skies and leaders stood in bunkers, then civilians too must endure. And so they clung to one another, breathing together, waiting together, refusing to give up, because surrender was death and endurance was life. The narrator's voice grew stronger, rising above the chaos, telling that Earth was bleeding but still standing, that the aliens had struck first but not last, that for every city burning there was a soldier rising, for every ship falling there was a missile climbing, for every scream there was a shout of defiance, and that this was only the beginning. The true storm had not yet come, and the true power of humanity had not yet been revealed. The alien fleet unleashed another wave, energy beams tearing across the globe. Yet the humans answered with fire from the sea, rockets from the land, bullets from the sky. The clash became a storm of light and thunder, a storm that painted the heavens red and gold. And amid that storm, both sides began to realize the truth, that this war would not end in hours, that the night would not deliver simple victory, that the battle for Earth had only begun. And as the first dawn approached, its pale light creeping through smoke and fire, humanity stood bloodied but unbroken, the alien commander staring at a world that still roared with defiance, his claws tightening, his heart hardening, whispering that the war would grind them down. Yet in the streets of Earth, people whispered back that the war would forge them stronger, that no matter how many years of training the invaders had endured, they had never faced humanity at its fiercest. They had never faced Earth when it fought for survival. The sky still burned, the ground still shook, but a new truth was clear. The invasion had begun, yet so too had the resistance. The smoke of war still hung heavy in the sky, the scent of fire and ash carried across continents, and the world trembled under the weight of alien war machines. Yet within that storm of fear, there was also a storm of resistance, for humanity refused to bow. Every hour they survived, they grew sharper. Every strike against the enemy lit another spark of courage. In the heart of the alien flagship, the commander paced like a predator caged in his own arrogance, his eyes burning with fury at the resistance he had not foreseen. 100 years of training should have forged perfection, yet his warriors faced a world that clawed back against impossible odds. And though he tried to dismiss it as chance, he could feel unease scratching at the edge of his thoughts, whispering that the prey was not prey at all, but something far more dangerous. Down below, in a ruined city swallowed by flame, a group of human soldiers crouched behind shattered walls, their rifles trembling in their hands, their armor scarred with soot, yet their eyes fixed on the massive alien walker stomping through the streets, its legs like towers of metal, its cannons glowing with lethal light. And still they did not flee. Instead, they prepared an ambush, setting charges in the rubble, timing their attack to the rhythm of the machine's stride, their whispers, carrying hope and fury as they counted together. The alien walker turned a corner, its cannons charging, but before it could fire, the humans triggered their trap. The street exploded in a roar of light, rubble collapsing under the giant's feet, the charges ripping through its armor. And though the machine staggered and screamed with alien metal voices, it did not fall. So the soldiers rose from the dust and fired with everything they had, bullets tearing into its exposed joints, rockets smashing into its chest, and at last, with a final shudder, it collapsed into the ruins, its carcass smoking as human voices cheered in triumph. In hidden bunkers across the globe, scientists and engineers worked with desperate speed, their hands racing across keyboards, their minds burning with impossible equations. They studied fragments torn from alien wreckage, glowing shards of metal and circuits far beyond human design. Yet slowly they began to understand. Slowly they began to see patterns, systems, weaknesses, and one scientist whispered that they could turn the enemy's own energy against them, that the very shields that made the invaders seem immortal might also be cracked if struck at the right frequency, if fired with the right rhythm. The narrator's voice echoed over the chaos, deep and steady, telling that the aliens had believed in perfect training, perfect weapons, perfect conquest, but they had not trained against desperation. They had not trained against the chaos of human spirit. They had not trained against enemies who refused to follow patterns, who fought like fire spreading in every direction, uncontrollable, unpredictable. And now the perfect invasion began to bleed. Above the oceans, alien warships clashed with human fleets, the water erupting as missiles rose like spears into the sky, as cannons fired again and again. The sea itself trembling under the storm of war, and yet one human submarine remained unseen, hidden in the deep, carrying a weapon never tested, a prototype born of fear and hope, its captain whispering a prayer as he gave the order to fire. The weapon tearing through the dark water like lightning, striking an alien cruiser with a force that shattered its shield and pierced its core, the explosion painting the waves with fire. The alien commander gripped the edge of his command table, his claws digging deep into the metal, his voice a growl as reports flooded in, damaged ships, lost units, delays in advancement. And though his soldiers obeyed with discipline, their voices carried the faint tremor of doubt, for they too had trained for perfection, for control, for easy victory. Yet now they faced chaos that no manual had prepared them for, and chaos was the one enemy their order could not conquer. On Earth, civilians rose in small acts of defiance. A mechanic repairing broken trucks into armored carriers, a farmer loading ancient rifles and teaching neighbors to fight, a doctor turning clinics into battle stations. Every person became a soldier in their own way, every action a piece of a larger resistance. And those cities crumbled and skies burned, humanity stitched itself together with threads of will and rage, stronger than the invaders had imagined. In the shadows of the ruins, a child picked up a shard of alien metal, its glow painting his face with eerie light. And though he was young, his eyes were fierce. He whispered to his mother that one day he would fight too. One day he would help push the monsters away. And his mother, though afraid, felt pride, because she knew her people were already forging a future in the fire of this night. A future that would not belong to the invaders, but to the survivors. The narrator rose again, his words echoing like thunder, saying that the battle was no longer about survival alone. It had become about pride, about proving that Earth was no prey to be hunted, but a predator in its own right, fierce and untamed. And for the first time since their arrival, the aliens felt the cold shadow of doubt stretching over their perfect plans. The alien commander roared for another wave of destruction, ordering fire across every continent, demanding that cities be turned to ash, the humans be drowned in despair, and beams of energy rain down, scorching the earth, shaking mountains, boiling rivers. Yet even under that storm, the humans struck back, hidden batteries firing, jets diving through clouds of smoke, soldiers striking from the rubble, the world itself roaring in defiance. The clash of light and fire lit the heavens, streaks of energy weaving across the night sky, explosions painting the land in terrible beauty, and both sides bled, both sides staggered, but only one side carried the fire of desperation. Only one side carried the madness of survival. Only one side carried the strength of chaos. and that side was human. As the third night of war descended, the alien commander stood silent, his heart heavy, his pride burning, his mind whispering that victory was no longer certain, that Earth was proving too costly, too wild, too relentless. And though he swore to crush them, he could not silence the voice that whispered again and again, "What if we cannot?" And on Earth, humanity whispered its answer with every missile, every scream, every act of survival. The answer was simple and sharp: they would not fall. The night burned on, the storm raged, and the turning point drew near. The war had stretched into endless nights and endless fire, and though the aliens rained destruction, without mercy humanity endured with teeth bared and fists clenched, and in the ruins of a once great city a discovery was about to change everything. Beneath the shattered remains of a collapsed tower, a small team of engineers worked by the glow of scavenged alien power cells, their faces pale, but their eyes alive with determination. One of them, a young woman named Alara, brushed dust from a broken alien device, her fingers tracing strange symbols etched into the metal as she whispered to the others that she had seen the same markings on captured fragments of enemy shields. They leaned closer, listening as she explained with trembling excitement that the shields were not perfect walls, but woven frequencies shifting and bending like waves, and if one could find the rhythm, the precise resonance, then the shield itself could be turned against the invaders. It could collapse like glass struck at the right note. The others stared in silence until one man finally asked how they could test such an idea, and Alara, with a half-smile and half-fear, told them the answer was simple. They would use the wreckage around them. They would try to sing to the shield with stolen energy and force it to crack. Above their heads, alien patrol ships swept the night, their lights scanning the ruins, searching for survivors, while in the skies, beyond the clouds, the great fleet hung like shadows, blotting out the stars. The alien commander stood upon the bridge of his flagship, eyes burning with fury, as yet another report reached him of damaged units, and lost ground, his claws digging into the metal railing as he swore that the humans were nothing but animals. Yet deep inside, he felt the crawling fear that animals could be more dangerous than soldiers. On the ground, soldiers prepared to make another stand, their rifles old, their armor patched with tape and cloth, yet their spirits unbroken. They whispered to each other that help was coming, even if they did not know from where. They believed in the stubborn fire of humanity, and in that belief they found strength. Back in the underground chamber, Alara connected wires to the alien device, sparks snapping in the darkness as the hum of strange energy filled the air. Her team held their breath as glowing lines spread across the metal like veins of light. She adjusted the controls, aligning the rhythm to the pattern she had seen again and again, her voice barely audible as she counted with the pulses 1, 2, 3. Then the device released a piercing tone that shook the walls, and in the far distance above them, an alien patrol ship screamed as its shield flickered and collapsed. The soldiers above stared in shock as their bullets suddenly tore into the vessel, its armor no longer invulnerable, and with a roar of triumph they fired again and again until the ship crashed into the ruins in flames and smoke, the humans cheering so loudly the sound echoed across the broken streets. Alara fell back, her chest heaving, her hands shaking as her team surrounded her, their voices filled with disbelief and wonder. They had cracked the shield. The invincible veil was no longer untouchable, and in that moment they knew the tide of the war could turn if only they could spread this knowledge across the world. The narrator's voice rose deep and steady, telling that the aliens had trained for a century to perfect their weapons, yet in only days humans had found a flaw they never expected. The arrogance of perfection had blinded them, and now the prey they thought weak had teeth sharp enough to pierce the predator's heart. The alien commander received the report with a snarl, his voice echoing through the command deck, demanding answers, demanding solutions. Yet his officers hesitated, their voices trembling as they admitted the truth. The humans had discovered resonance, they had learned to break the shields, and though the commander roared that it was impossible, his mind knew it was true. He turned his gaze to the planet below, his claws tight, his pride wounded. He gave the order to increase the assault, to crush every center of resistance before the knowledge could spread, before chaos could consume his fleet. But even as he spoke, the seeds of chaos had already taken root. Across the globe, messages traveled in secret codes, through hidden radios, through whispers carried by survivors, through signals written in light upon mountains. The word spread that the shields could break, and hope rose like fire, feeding itself, growing brighter. With every retelling, armies began to plan strikes, not of desperation, but of strategy, targeting shielded machines with new weapons tuned to the rhythm of resonance. In one ruined valley, a band of resistance fighters set a trap for a towering alien walker. They hid in silence as the machine approached, its cannons glowing with death. But when it came close, they activated their crude resonance device, a box built from scavenged parts. The shield cracked with a shattering sound, and rockets roared from the hills, tearing into the machine's chest until it collapsed in flames and smoke, the fighters crying out in triumph. The narrator whispered that the invaders had believed the Earth would fall in hours, yet the longer the war dragged, the stronger the humans became. Every failure a lesson, every wound a weapon, every night a forge for sharper resolve, and the invaders now faced not prey, but predators born of fire and chaos. In the depths of his flagship, the alien commander stood alone, staring into the dark void of space, his reflection broken upon the glass. He whispered to himself that the humans should not have been able to resist, that their survival defied reason. And yet they survived, and worse, they grew stronger, and though his pride demanded victory, his heart knew the truth: their century of training had not prepared them for this. On the ground, Alara stared at the glowing device, her eyes filled with both fear and pride. She had uncovered a secret that could change the war, but with it came a burden. She knew the aliens would stop at nothing to silence her and her team, yet she also knew there was no turning back. Humanity had found its chance, and she would carry it forward even if it cost her everything. The night burned on with the fire of endless battles, but in the ruins of cities, in the whispers of survivors, in the roar of resistance, there was a new sound, the sound of hope. And high above the earth, the alien fleet for the first time trembled at the thought of defeat. The night was torn by fire as the alien fleet moved with sudden fury, their ships descending in waves like dark storms across the sky. The air trembled with the weight of their engines, and the earth shook beneath their weapons. The humans, who had just begun to taste hope, felt the shadow of dread return, yet they stood firm, their hearts refusing to bow. Alara sat among her team in a hidden chamber, her device still glowing faintly with the power of resonance, her fingers trembling as she whispered that the aliens would not remain blind for long. They would strike harder now, to erase the flaw, to silence the voices who had discovered their weakness. And even as she spoke, the ground above them thundered with explosions, the city above reduced to ashes, as if the sky itself had opened in rage. The alien commander paced his command deck, his eyes blazing with fury, his voice like a blade, as he barked orders. He would not allow the humans to spread their knowledge any further. He demanded precision, he demanded annihilation, he demanded silence, and his officers obeyed, launching waves of fire upon every sign of resistance, striking towns, villages, and fortresses with merciless force. On the ground, soldiers braced behind walls of rubble, firing at shadows that fell from the sky, the resonance devices crude and fragile, yet burning bright against alien shields. Every time a machine faltered, every time a ship fell, the soldiers roared with defiance. Yet, for every victory came firestorms of retaliation, for every triumph came waves of sorrow. The war was no longer a battle, it was a storm devouring the earth. The narrator's voice cut through the chaos, steady and grim, saying that the invaders had tasted fear for the first time, and fear made them desperate. They had trained for 100 years to invade, but they had never trained to doubt, and now their answer to doubt was fire, endless fire. Alara and her team fled deeper into the ruins, carrying the device wrapped in torn cloth, their footsteps echoing in the hollow dark. She whispered that they could not stay here, that the knowledge must travel beyond them to every fighter in every land, or humanity would be crushed beneath the weight of the counterstrike. She knew the aliens had marked her as a target. She knew death followed close behind, yet she pressed on, her spirit burning with the knowledge that survival demanded sacrifice. Above the ruins, drones hunted like vultures, scanning with beams of light, their movements sharp and cruel. One passed close to the team, its sensors almost catching the glow of their device. But a soldier threw himself into the open, drawing fire with his own body. The drones shredded him with energy, and in his last cry, he shouted for the others to run, his voice echoing long after his body had fallen. Alara stumbled, tears in her eyes, but But she did not stop. She clutched the device, as though it were her own heart, knowing the sacrifice was not wasted, for in war, every step taken with courage carve a path for others to follow. Meanwhile, the alien commander tightened his grip on power, demanding that every city be reduced to ruins until no human remained to resist, his mind cold with calculation. Yet in the depths of his thoughts, a small whisper of doubt grew louder. He remembered the patrol ship that had fallen, the walker that had collapsed under resonance. He remembered the look of disbelief on his officers' faces, and the whisper told him this war was slipping beyond his control. Across the globe, resistance cells lit fires of rebellion, armed now with fragments of resonance technology. Though crude and unstable, they struck again and again, toppling shielded units that had once seemed invincible, and each victory spread like sparks on the wind, igniting courage. In others, soon entire regions began to rise in coordinated strikes, as if the planet itself had awakened from slumber. The narrator's voice deepened, warning that the invaders had underestimated the power of desperation, for a desperate people will fight with claws when swords are gone, with stones when bullets are spent, and with fire in their hearts when no hope remains. And in that fire lies a strength no training can prepare for. The aliens rained destruction from the skies, but for every strike they made, the humans found ways to adapt. They tunneled through ruins to avoid bombardments. They masked their signals with static storms. They learned to turn the debris of fallen ships into weapons. And every day there will sharpen like a blade honed on endless stone. In one valley, a massive alien fortress descended, its shields glowing like a wall of fire. The commander himself oversaw the assault, vowing to crush the humans here. And now, yet Alara and her team reached the valley, carrying the resonance device, their faces pale, but their spirits blazing. They set the machine upon the rocks, tuning its rhythm against the fortress shield. The air vibrated like a living drum, and the shield shimmered, cracks spreading like ice. Under strain, the humans hiding in the valley rose with weapons ready, pouring fire into the fortress. As its shield shattered like glass, the commander roared in disbelief as explosions consumed the walls, soldiers swarming into the breach with cries that echoed across the mountains. It was the first true victory of the war, not a skirmish, not a survival, but a strike that forced the invaders to retreat. The narrator spoke with rising power, declaring that the invaders who believed they would win in hours now faced a war that would bleed them dry. For every day that passed, Earth grew sharper, stronger, and more united. The century of alien training had prepared them for conquest, but not for resistance forged in fire and sorrow. The alien commander watched the burning fortress, his claws trembling with rage and shame. He whispered that this was no longer a war of domination. It was a war for survival, not of humans, but of his own kind, and for the first time, he feared the possibility of defeat. Alara stood among the fighters, her hair singed, her hands scarred, but her eyes unbroken. She held the resonance device high and whispered that humanity had been wounded, beaten, burned, yet it was still alive, and so long as it breathed, it would fight. The night ended not with silence, but with the roar of humans who had tasted victory, their cries echoing into the skies, shaking the stars themselves, while above the fleet lingered in growing uncertainty, their century of pride beginning to crumble under the weight of defiance. And in that defiance, the story of humanity had only just begun. The sky over Earth burned red as alien warships regrouped, their formation stretching across the heavens like a black crown of fire. Their pride wounded by defeat, their resolve hardened into cruel vengeance. The commander's eyes glowed with cold fury as he ordered the release of a weapon hidden for a century, a weapon even his own soldiers feared. On the ground, humans stood among ruins, breathing heavy from their fragile victory, their voices still echoing in the mountains. When the first shadow swept across the valley, it was not a ship nor a storm, but a sphere of living darkness drifting slowly through the clouds. The air thickened. As it passed, birds fell silent, rivers stilled, soldiers clutched their throats as if the very breath was stolen from them. Alara watched the horizon, her eyes wide, the resonance device in her hands. Trembling, she whispered that this was not ordinary technology. This was something else, something forbidden, and her voice cracked as she realized the invaders had kept it hidden because it was too dangerous even for them. The narrator's voice grew grim, saying that the aliens who had trained for 100 years had now unleashed the nightmare born of that training, a weapon not meant for battle, but for extinction. The sphere opened like an eye, pulsing with black light, waves of distortion rolling across the land. Metal warpstone cracked, and men fell screaming as their minds filled with whispers not of their own language, but of something older, darker, and alien. Soldiers fired their weapons at the sphere, but their shots bent away, as if the air itself rejected their defiance. The alien commander smiled for the first time in days, believing the humans had reached their end. He raised his hand and whispered that this was the end of Earth. No more resistance, no more defiance, only silence beneath the shadow. But on the ground, humans did not kneel. They staggered, they bled, they cried out, but they clung to life with the same fire that had carried them this far. Alara pressed her trembling hands to the resonance device, her team, urging her to try. Even as the sphere's whispers clawed into their minds, she tuned the rhythm, desperate for a sound that could fight the darkness. The first hum echoed, weakly, barely cutting through the storm. The team shouted for her to try again, sweat running down their faces, blood at their lips, yet their voices refused to fall silent. The device pulsed brighter with each strike of her hand, the hum rising, the sound growing into a vibration that fought against the whispers. The narrator spoke of a battle, not of weapons, but of wills, the sphere pressing shadows into every corner of the earth, while a handful of humans stood against it with nothing but courage and a fragile machine. The resonance finally struck true, a wave of sound rolling across the valley. The darkness shivered, the whispers faltered for a heartbeat. Soldiers gasped as breath returned to their lungs. The commander above snarled, slamming his claw against the control panel, demanding more power into the sphere. The sky cracked with black lightning. The ground opened in fissures as the weapon screamed. Its power multiplied. Mountains groaned like dying beasts. Entire forests withered into ash. Alara fell to her knees, the device cracking under strain. Yet she pressed her hand against it, whispering that they could not stop, that if the device shattered, they must use their voices, their hearts, anything to keep the hum alive. And so they did. Soldiers began to chant, at first weak, then louder, their cries merging with the resonance, the sound swelling across the battlefield, until it was no longer a machine, but a chorus of defiance, a living wave of human will slamming against the alien weapon. The alien commander stared in disbelief, his soldiers whispering that the readings made no sense. The humans should have been broken, yet the sphere was faltering, its light dimming under the weight of voices that refused to yield. He roared in denial, commanding the weapon to consume everything. The valley shook, the stars seemed to vanish, as if swallowed by the sphere, yet through the black storm the chorus only grew louder, every soldier, every survivor, every broken body, lifting its voice in the night, the resonance bursting into a final blinding wave that split the shadows like dawn breaking across endless night. The sphere cracked, its surface rippling like shattered glass. The whispers turned to screams, not human, not alien, but something ancient, torn apart by defiance. Then, with a thunder that shook the heavens, the sphere collapsed into itself, vanishing in a burst of light that left silence across the battlefield. The silence did not last. It was broken by cries of victory, soldiers raising their fists, tears streaming down their faces. The humans had stood against a weapon of extinction and lived. The alien commander gripped his throne, claws digging deep, rage boiling in his chest. He had never imagined defeat. He had never prepared for despair, yet now both pressed upon him like chains. The narrator's voice rose strong, declaring that humanity had faced its darkest hour and did not break, and because of that the war was no longer about invasion. It was about survival for the invaders themselves. Alara collapsed beside the shattered device, her chest heaving, her eyes glowing with tears. She whispered that they had survived, but survival was not victory. The aliens would come again, with more fury, with more darkness, and humanity must be ready. The humans carried her from the battlefield, their heads high, their voices steady. For the first time, they no longer felt hunted, they felt dangerous, and the stars above no longer looked like chains, but like paths waiting to be taken. The alien commander turned to the distant galaxy, whispering that this war had become something far greater than conquest. It was a war that would decide not only the fate of Earth, but the fate of his own people. For if humans could defeat the sphere, then perhaps they could defeat anything. And so the war stretched forward into a future written not in despair, but in fire, a future where every dawn would be uncertain, yet every dawn would belong to those who dare to fight. The stars burned like silver fires across the endless dark, yet to the eyes of the alien commander, they no longer shone with pride. They felt like knives against his skin, because every star now whispered a truth. He could not escape the truth that humanity had faced his weapon of extinction and had not died, the truth that his century of training was nothing against a will that refused to bend. On Earth, the ruins, still smoked cities lay, broken mountains carved with scars, rivers twisted from the weight of battle. Yet among the ruins, men and women walked with heads high, voices steady, and eyes bright. They had seen despair and crushed it with defiance, their chants echoing across the valleys like thunder, rolling through stone. Their armies were no longer frightened survivors, they were warriors forged in fire. Alara stood among them, the shattered resonance device cradled in her arms like a relic, her clothes torn, her skin marked with scars. Yet her gaze steady, she whispered that the war was no longer only about defending Earth. It was about claiming a future among the stars, because if aliens had trained 100 years to conquer, then humanity would train 1,000 to rise. The narrator's voice carried across the silence, saying that the invaders had come with arrogance, believing Earth to be prey. Yet now they trembled, because prey had grown teeth sharper than steel. Above the world, alien fleets gathered, once more forming lines that filled the sky. The commander ordered retreat, yet pride burned in his chest, and he spat commands to regroup, to strike again, to prove that fear was a lie. But his soldiers hesitated, their voices low, their faces pale, because they had seen what the humans did to the sphere. They had seen men and women sing against extinction and win. The first human ships rose into orbit, not vast, not mighty, but fierce, crafted from broken wrecks and scavenged steel, painted with symbols of survival, engines roaring with the fire of determination. The alien commander stared at the screens, his jaw tight, his heart pounding, as he realized humans had already taken their first step into his domain, the void. Alara stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, her hands gripping the rail, her eyes locked on the enemy fleet. She whispered to her crew that fear had no place here, that today they were not defending Earth. They were carrying Earth into the stars. Her words lit fire in their souls, and every soldier, every pilot answered with a roar that shook the hull. The battle began like lightning, the first human ships diving into formation, their weapons blazing crude, yet deadly. Alien ships surged forward, their guns spitting fire across the void. Explosions lit the black sky like suns dying in silence, debris spinning like broken crowns. Yet the humans did not falter. Every loss only fed their fury, every strike only sharpened their will. The narrator spoke with rising force, saying that the aliens had trained for precision, for discipline, for perfection. Yet humans fought with chaos, with passion, with rage, and that chaos was fire that burned through flawless lines, tearing holes into strategies built for centuries. The alien commander shouted for his fleet to hold, to crush them. Yet his soldiers whispered of retreat, their eyes filled with dread. His own heart screamed that the war was slipping away, slipping into the hands of those he had called weak, prey, unworthy. In the heart of the void, Alara's ship broke through the enemy line, engines screaming, hull burning, weapons firing with all the fury of Earth. She pressed the cracked resonance core into a new chamber, her voice trembling as she whispered a single command: awaken, and the device pulsed once more with sound, not of despair, but of triumph. Waves of resonance cutting across the fleet, shaking enemy ships from within, tearing their precision into chaos. The alien commander roared, striking his console, his eyes wild as ship after ship fell to the resonance, their lines broken, their pride shattered. He screamed that this was impossible, yet the void answered only with silence broken by fire. Human voices rose again, carried through comms, through battle cries, through the hum of the resonance. Not whispers of survival now, but of conquest, not fear, but hunger for the stars. They had been caged on one world. Now the cage was broken. The alien fleet shattered like glass, commanders, screaming soldiers, fleeing engines, flaring in retreat. The great warships, turning from hunters to prey, the human fleet gave chase, their cries burning across the void, as if to say, you came to conquer us, now we will conquer you. The alien commander sat alone in his throne, his claws trembling, his chest heavy, his mind whispering that this was not invasion anymore. It was beginning of something far greater. He whispered that his people had awakened something they could never put back to sleep. On Earth, sirens turned to music ruins, to banner soldiers, to heroes. The world no longer looked at the sky with fear. They looked with hunger, with ambition, with pride. They had been invaded, but instead of chains, they had found wings. The narrator's voice rose to thunder, saying that for 100 years the aliens had trained to master war, yet in a single night humanity had mastered survival, and survival had become strength, and strength had become fire. Alara stood on the bridge, her ship burning with scars, her crew exhausted, yet alive, her eyes fixed on the stars. She whispered softly that Earth was no longer alone. Earth was no longer prey. Earth was the beginning, and with her voice the crew echoed the same word again, and again, the word that shook the void: humanity. The alien commander closed his eyes, his fleet broken, his pride shattered, his whispers lost in silence. And in that silence, he realized the truth: the war had ended, but the story had only begun. And so the dawn of fire spread across the galaxy, a dawn not of aliens who had trained for centuries, but of humans who had bled for hours and refused to fall, the dawn of fire that would burn forever in the stars.